Welcome. Let me play you something. There you go. That was a composite or a composition. And what you saw when it played is a little spaceship coming down through Tacoma and flying around one building and then flying in front of another building. And what we're going to do is we're going to introduce you to several steps in a process. And this is only designed introduction. Here's what you're going to cover. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to take a picture in Photoshop and we're going to chop it up into multiple layers. We're then going to build ourselves a spaceship, just kind of a simple little old school kind of spaceship. You can build something else if you want. And then we're going to animate that spaceship along a path. And that path is going to be to animate so it kind of looks like it's flying around a picture. After that gets rendered out, you're going to be introduced to something called After Effects. After Effects is a compositing program that allows you to take, and as you can see, an animation, almost looks like VPR right there. Take an animation and put it very much like a Photoshop file, stacked against the background, stacked with the foreground maybe in front, and I'll put it like right there. There you go, stacked with the foreground. I'll turn the foreground off and on so you can kind of see that. And then we're actually going to add in a post-production overlay. And all that's going to happen before we even get to the end where we do the usual stuff in Premiere, where you have a video file and you slap on some music. So it's kind of a long journey, this route, but you got to remember that you have to have a picture, you're going to do an animation, you're going to do compositing, and then you're going to do some editing in Premiere Pro. So it's a larger number of steps than we've done recently. The first thing you're going to want to do is get a photograph that you're going to use in your composite. What I did in the example you saw at the beginning was get a photograph from Wikicommons. What is Wikicommons? Well, Wikicommons is a repository of public domain images. The picture that you see in front of you here is from 1974, and what's awesome about it is it came from the National Archives. What does that mean? That means your tax dollars paid for it. And if your tax dollars paid for getting this photograph made, there's a very good chance that it's public domain. And actually this one is. The only time that your tax dollars wouldn't be guaranteeing that you have something in the public domain is if it's a specific contract that your tax dollars paid for. But in this case, what I have is I have a public domain photo of Tacoma circa 1974, and I'm going to use this to create my composite. Now, key thing here is that I'm going to be working in high definition. So what I have to do in Photoshop is I got to crop this to high definition. I'm going to be treating this as a static image. It's not going to be moving, so I'm going to just simply grab the cropping tool and I'm going to make sure that it is going to be set to high definition size 1920, and I type in PX in the cropping tool. When you click the cropping tool, you want to type in the PX. That way it knows it's pixels. And I do the same thing for the other dimension, which is 1080, and type in PX. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, won't it know that it's pixels? Well, I actually want to make sure that my ending result size is exactly 1920 pixels across by 1080 pixels tall. That's what I want to make sure. So that's why if I want it to be high definition and I want it to give me the view that I want inside my high definition screen, I want to make sure that it is exactly 1920 by 1080. You also want to make sure that when you do this, if you think you're going to crop a picture a lot, you want to make sure you have enough extra pixels to crop. You never want to have a photograph that's smaller than 1920 pixels, because if you try and crop something and it's smaller, then what you end up with is you end up with Photoshop blowing up the picture. That will lead to a very blurry or grainy or pretty much an unsatisfying photograph.
And if you want, you are more than welcome to use your own picture for this assignment. You don't have to go out and search Pixabay or something for it. And one other thing about the cropping, if you're looking at the screen, you'll see, hey, that doesn't look like my Photoshop. That's because at home I use CS6 because I own it. Yeah, I still rent CC18, but I still like CS6. So the cropping on CC 2018 is different. You have to put in width and height and resolution, like you see on the screen here. Just make sure that no matter what image you have, you got enough pixels. Like this one that I got from Wikimedia had 3,000 pixels across. A lot of extra pixels to spare, so I could do some creative cropping if I wanted to.
I'm pretty happy with this. I think I'm going to give myself just a little more sky, and then I'm going to hit the Enter key to accept that crop. I'm going to go File, and I'm going to save it. And I'm not going to save over the original. I'm going to go, when I do the Save As, I'm just going to change this to trains. And I'm not going to save it as a JPEG. I don't want to compress it. So for right now, it's already been compressed once. So I'm going to save it as a Photoshop document, PSD, and go ahead and hit Save. Now, this is reduced in size, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Control key and hit 0. That's going to make it larger for me. And now I'm going to do some cutting. I have to create a 2-layer image in Photoshop. If you are comfortable with Photoshop, do it however you wish. I'm just going to show you the nickel version. I'm going to click on the tool that is far way down. It's called the Quick Selection tool. And I'm going to simply draw through the sky. And now as I draw through the sky, what it will do is it will take and it will make a selection that will give me mostly a decent shape. It's not going to be perfect, especially since this photo is a little older. It missed one entire building there. And so I'm going to have to fix that. However, I'm going to be compositing in between the sky and the building. So this sky this building that's way in the background, I actually would not want to select that, because if I want to fly a spaceship right in front of that building, then I actually want it to make it look like my spaceship's in front of the building, but also behind this Union Station. So what I really care about is this section right there where my cursor is going across, and I think I'm pretty dang happy with that. Now, I'm not too worried about the shown fields selection. I could zoom in if I wanted to and do a better selection if I need to. I over selected the sky, so what I would need to do is I would need to unselect this, and you do that by holding down the Alt key and simply drawing through the area that you don't want to select. And there's a lot of other tools for doing selection, but I am holding down the space bar to get the little hand, and I'm moving this around, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to make sure that I unselect the sky portion of the top of the Union Station dome. Now, this building where my cursor is at is going to be in the background, so I do want to make sure that that is not selected.
Also, I have a few holes, and I would just left click and draw through those to select them.
And unfortunately, I have a little antenna up there. Now, that little antenna is actually on top of the dome, so I might have to go up and actually make a selection of that. Now, this will be a prime candidate for using a different selection tool. Not the quick wand tool, but there actually is a tool underneath the lasso tool called the polygonal lasso. And what I want to do is I want to unselect that antenna. How? If you hold down the Alt key, it shows you a minus, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and I'm going to draw all the way up to the top of the antenna, and then I'm going to go over to the antenna. I'm going to click in the top corner on the right, click in the top corner on the left, and I'm going to draw this all the way down and inside my previous selection, and I'm going to click, and then I'm just going to double click. And what that does is I have now deselected the antenna. Now, that's not a perfect selection, but the thing is that it depends all upon how fast whatever you're doing goes by an object. It is going to be good enough for me, I'll press Control 0, to be able to make my composite. All I have to do now is think to myself, what piece goes in front? So what I did is I cut out, or I selected the sky, and I could cut out the sky right now. However, that's not going to be the piece that goes in front. The piece that goes in front is actually the bottom of the picture. But how come I selected the top? Because the top had more consistent color, made it a lot easier to do a quick selection by using the quick selection brush. So that's why I did that. How do I get it so that it selects the bottom? Well, in Photoshop, it's pretty easy. Underneath the select tool, thing called inverse, bam. And what I've got is I now have the bottom of my picture selected. Now, I'm not worried about any of these buildings that didn't get selected. They're going to be in the background. The Union Station and some of those other pieces like Schoenfeld's furniture are going to be in the foreground. The elements that are on the right side of the picture, I'm not even going to care about. All I do care about is right-clicking on this item and being able to do what's called a layer via copy. And I'm going to select that. And what it does is it will take, I'll go ahead and I'll turn off the eyeball on my background layer. What it does is it gives me a edge that I am going to fly my spaceship around. Now, I don't want to do a layer via cut because I want to make sure that the two pieces lie on top of each other. If you were to thinking yourself, why don't I just cut that piece out? Sometimes Photoshop puts a little halo in, depends on how you made your selection. So you don't want that. You want to do, I'm going to Control Z real fast, and I don't want to choose layer via cut. I want to choose layer via copy. And that just makes my copy right there. Now, if you're a good Photoshopper,
You should know you should always name your layers.
foreground. In this layer, that one's already called the background, and it's locked. So it's already saved as trains.psd. So I'm just going to go File and Save. So might ask me the question, compatibility. I'm okay with that. Now that is the Photoshop portion of what you're going to do. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how you take and position the spaceship by utilizing Lightwave.
Now, one interesting little secret about the person recording this lecture, me, is that I love tin toys. Tin toys are, whether they're retro or vintage or reproductions, I don't really care. They're just very, very cool. I like them. And specifically, you might have recognized that the little spaceship that I made kind of looked like a little rocket ship that kind of looked like a tin toy. And yeah, there you go. That's the thing. That's what I'm kind of building. And there's no rules about what you fly. Okay, you could totally build a spaceship. You could totally build a flying hot dog. This one right there, that kind of looks like the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. All right, could be. Maybe it's just same colors. Doesn't make a bit of difference what you make. You just have to make something that is, well, moving around. And so just because I'm going to go for this kind of thing doesn't mean you have to copy. You could think to yourself, I'd like to build a flying saucer. Okay. I'd like to build an X1 rocket. I don't know what that is, but I've heard it say before. I probably do know. I probably could look it up. I'd like to build a lunar lander. Okay, yeah, just whatever you wish. All right, so I'm going to just show you how I built mine, and I'm going to do it kind of fast because why not? So I started with a ball, and I drew the ball, and I extended it so that it kind of gave me the shape of my spaceship. And that pretty much was it. That's the main body. And I'm going to press the N key because I want to make sure that I have equal radii for my X and my Z, so that I get a nice kind of round spaceship. I definitely want this to look, well, it depends if you want it to, how you want it to look. I do want this to look smoother though, so I'm going to give this 96 sides and 24 segments because I just want it to look kind of smoother, and I'm not really sure what I'm actually going to do with it, and I'm not using very many polygons, so hey, I got polygons to burn. And I know you're thinking to yourself, couldn't you just hit the tab key? The answer is, yeah, I could, all right, or I could not. How did I build the fins? Well, the fins actually, I'm going to take and create one fin and kind of put that into place. And how I did the fins was I went to the Create tool and I used the pen. And you might go, well, what do you mean? Why would you use the pen? Watch. The pen tool, if I draw in a, well, I don't know if you really call it a clockwise direction, but if you build something in a clockwise direction, what it does is it gives you a polygon. All right. Now, the reason I went clockwise is because it is flipped toward me. If I were to do a quick Control Z and draw something in a counterclockwise, it doesn't look like anything's there, but it's actually just flipped in the opposite direction. Yeah. All right. So that's the whole point about me going in a clockwise direction. How complicated do my fins need to be? I don't know. And that's a terrible fin. I'm going to pause this lecture and build a better fin. And after 14 long, agonizing minutes, no, just kidding, it was like 30 seconds, I got a fin that I'm happier with. So using the tool, when I come in here to the Create tool, and using the whole pen tool, creates a polygon. Now, how is that going to be a fin? Well, once you have a polygon created, I'm going to, by the way, the reason the pen tool got turned off is because I used the drag tool for the editing. So the polygon gets selected by clicking on polygon, already selected. It gets its thickness by going in and doing an extrusion. What? Extrusion. Multiply, extrude. What an extrude will do is it gives something some thickness. And I'm going to do this from the top-down view. And that is my polygon. There we go. Now, it's not very curvy. Probably could have made it a little more curvy. But I'm also thinking to myself, it's absolutely fine for what I'm going to do. when I say more curvy, give it some more points. Can I subdivide it? The answer is no, I can't, because I have a pretty flat fin that's got way more than 4 points and polygons. If we look at, when I talk about sides, this thing right there, you can't subdivide that. It doesn't happen. So that's where, well, I mean, I suppose I could take the entire model, select the entire piece, and then just go to a regular subdivide, which is under multiply, subdivide, and just have issues with that. Look, got problems. All right, how would I divide that up? Well, I'd have to use some fans, and I'm just thinking to myself, nah, I'm okay with that. It's a toy. It's fine. I need 3 of those. Now, here's the kind of important part. I am going to just copy and paste and rotate, or I could use the clone tool around the center, or I could do anything that I wanted. If I would use the clone tool, I could actually get 4 fins if I feel the need. Mostly, though, when I drew my model, I actually didn't draw everything in the center, so I pretty much would want to make sure that whatever I did, I would select everything right there, and then I would probably want to make sure that that's at least eyeballed at the center. So I would move that so that it's, oops, so that's mostly, I did not press the T tool to move it. So it's mostly pretty close to being eyeballed at the center. And then once I get that in place, then I could just use the clone tool. All right, now I don't want to have everything selected. I just want to have the fin selected. And so I select on the fin, press the clone tool to get C. I want 2 copies, and I'm going to spin them at a heading of 120 degrees. So when I do that, I get 2 more copies, and that gives me my rocket ship. Okay, so maybe if I would have spent a little more time, I could have got a little better fin. I know, but I could have just copied. Well, I talked about it, but the one thing that I didn't do is that I didn't give it a port, because every good spaceship has a window. Oh. All right, so my window is just going to be another ball. I'm going to go to create. I'm going to use the ball tool, and I'm just going to draw something with. I got all these pieces in here, and I'm still on the exact same layer. So I'm thinking, can I minimize this? Yeah, because this doesn't have to be big. Maybe I want the portal to look a little rougher, or maybe I want it to stay perfectly round. It's your call on that one. What I am going to do on my portal is I am going to select it and press the Q tool, and oops, actually I had the point selected, my bad. I'm gonna select it, press Q, and call this my window, and for right now I'm just gonna make the window black. All right, in fact, you saw that I didn't do any coloring in for my spaceship at all. I kept it kind of gray, and maybe you're thinking, I'm okay with leaving it a little bit gray. Maybe you don't want any points for having it look pretty, and that's a decision that you would have to make. Just kind of like when I'm making my port and I'm placing it. Probably should maybe zoom way in and get a lot better placement inside my spaceship and get a better rotation on that one. And it looks like I'm overthinking this whole window thing, because I don't even know where it's going to look like on the side of my ship. Probably should go double check that. Let's see. If it's on the side of my ship right there, probably needs to be bent into the ship also. So press the Y tool, rotate that like yay, so, and just sink it into the ship. And if it doesn't go in perfectly, it's okay. You can just say I meant to do that. All right. And that is as simple as the spaceship is going to get. Got a nice little window. You got some fins that probably need more polygons on them that I should have drawn better, but that's going to be good enough for what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now our next step is going to be taking our spaceship and putting it into Lightwave and adjusting the flight path and making sure that it fits well around the picture that we cut out. So to do that, we're going to need to take a couple of steps. Well, first, let's get our spaceship somehow into Lightwave, whether you send it through Hub or whether you load it in by hand. The second, what we're going to do is we're going to load our PSD into Lightwave so we can see what the picture looks like through the camera. All right, that's going to involve taking the camera and making sure that it's set to be 1080p high def. Well, just 1080 high def. It's not really a P because it's already progressive. And looking through the camera, it's also important. And then taking and loading in the picture so we can have a visual backdrop. How's that done? Well, underneath the file, there's a little button called Backdrop. You can go ahead and click that one. And inside 2018, there is a button that says Compositing. Now, Lightwave itself actually has the ability to have a background and a foreground. And if we were just simply taking our Photoshop document and putting in the different layers, we could simply use Lightwave and call it good. But we're going to be using After Effects to do some post-processing. While Lightwave does have the capability of doing some basic compositing, we're not going to be doing that. Yeah, Lightwave actually does a lot too. It will even do, there's a thing that I would suggest that if you really like the idea of compositing, you look up something called Shadow Catcher, which is a way for Lightwave to generate shadows onto a 2D picture. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and load into the background image. And I got to look for my trains.psd right down there. And open it up. When I get that in there, you should see the image show up as your background. Now, if it doesn't, you may need to press the D key, which is the display window that you see, and you might need to make sure that your camera view is set to background image. It may be set to blank, depending upon your settings. It may be set to some weird backdrop color, but it needs to be, for this one, set to the background image. The background image will automatically fit to the 1920 by 1080. And if you've never played with the background before, if it will stay no matter where your camera's at. Like if I take and I click and I move my camera around, yes, I'm moving my camera around, but the background completely stays static. And it's a little unnerving if you're not used to it, but it's a projection. And as long as you're looking through the camera, it will be there. If you're not looking through the camera, like let's say you're in perspective view, so I can go ahead and change my view, pressing 4 on the 10 keypad, and there's no backdrop. All right, it's not there. It's only going to be there when you're looking through the camera. I just press 6 on the 10 keypad. So the very first thing you always want to think about is what's your flight path going to be? What's your motion path going to be? What we're going to do is we're going to set up a basic motion path, and then we're going to show you how to edit that motion path, and then we're also going to show you how to align elements to the motion path, because that's going to be pretty important, especially since we're going to be flying kind of around a curve, and we don't want that to look bad. All right. So what's my basic motion path? My basic motion path is I'm going to be coming in through the sky. If you kind of watch my cursor, I'm going to be flying down behind the Union Station, then kind of curving around, and then flying in front of it and flying right past the camera, kind of doing a flyby. All right, so I'll start with taking and kind of getting my ship kind of how I like it, and I got to be careful about gimbal lock, because I want to be able to have control over the rotation of my ship, so be cautious about how you rotate it around. And when I say gimbal lock, I mean getting, if you're taking and turning, you could get a couple of the controls stuck in the same spot. Let me see if I can actually get that, if I can try that. There we go. So the blue and the red are stuck in the same spot. So be cautious about that rotation. My basic motion path is going to be to start somewhere up in the sky, kind of far away, and I'm doing this all through the camera, and I'm going to say there's going to be my beginning keyframe. I'm going to kind of decide that I'm going to go about 10 seconds here. So I'll start maybe even off camera. But before I get off camera, I'm going to do a little more alignment to get myself a basic kind of starting position. And I am pressing the T and the Y key to move stuff around, and I will start off camera somewhere yield about there. That's going to be my frame 1. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to about where I want the curve to happen, which would probably be maybe about a frame 120. These are all things that could be tweaked a little bit later. And I am going to fly my spaceship. I'm not going to worry about the alignment or the angle just yet. We'll talk about that when we start editing the motion path. But I am going to fly my spaceship so that it's sort of going to be behind the Union Station. And again, I'm not going to worry about alignment or the direction that the spaceship is flying. I said it at the beginning, but we'll do the rest in tweaks later. But I just kind of want to say, okay, at right about the 4-second mark, I want it to be past the Union Station. And kind of decide that, well, I want to be kind of, yeah, I'm okay right about there. And then somewhere by about frame 300, I am going to rotate my spaceship. And I'll even do a little bit of a spin, because why not? And this is where then I want to do a flyby past the camera. So I want to get closer to the camera, and I want to say closer. I mean, I want it to be like right up in past the camera. And maybe I could even rotate a little bit more if I wanted to, and just have it just kind of whiz by it. Look how crappy those fins are. Yeah, those are really, really, really bad. Oh, and I got a little bit of clipping going on there. I might want to press the D key and turn on the fixed near clip distance. There we go. 100 millimeters should be fine. And just have it whiz by there. Now I'll watch my motion path, and it won't be fancy. This is just a rough. So my spaceship kind of comes down. At some point, it's going to do some turn things, and yeah, that doesn't look very good at all. In fact, it's actually turning really badly. And this is where we're going to go into some of the motion path tools. Now remember, you have a cutout of the Union Station or whatever you have your cutout of, and eventually that cutout will obscure your model as it flies behind it. So don't freak out like going like, well, are we just putting it with the backdrop? There will eventually be something that will cover the model at some point. All right, and that's why we want to really talk about that whole motion path. We want to make sure we're flying around something, and that something is going to be a Photoshop cutout that we're going to put in using After Effects, because we're also going to do some post-processing of the kind of old school film coverage. So how do you take and adjust the motion path? Well, the motion path is this white line, if you've never seen it, and I'm going to look at this from the top-down view, which is number 2 on the 10 keypad. And the motion path is only going to give us, it's not going to show us the entire motion path. And since I really want to see the entire motion path, how the heck do you get there? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to go and open up your preferences underneath the edit, and let's go into the OpenGL options. What this does is this is the motion path, and it set a default of showing you 60 frames before a keyframe and 60 frames after. Sorry, not a keyframe, but 60 frames before a position and after. So if you'll notice, it looks like the lines kind of flowing along with it. And that's because it's only showing you 60 pre and 60 post. Could you just set this up to be the full amount? Sure, you could type in 300 and 300, and that way you'll see the entire curve. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, move this up so you can see the entire curve right there. I'm going to get rid of the preferences window because we're done. This next part will make more sense to those that are used to using a vector-based tool or Illustrator or something, because what we're going to do is we're going to edit the curve. How do you edit a curve? Well, in order to edit a curve, what you need is you need points and handles. The points in Lightwave are the individual keyframes, and each of these keyframes can be given handles using something called the Modify Path tool. Now, there's two things in the motion path that actually would matter. The first one is move path, and a move path will allow you to move an entire path. That's really good if you need to shuffle something left or right or up or down. If I go from a different view, shuffling the entire path up or down, that's a really good tool. But the path tool is also something that will give you control to edit each of the individual keyframes, where you can take and you can push an entire keyframe up and down. But where this is a little frustrating is, well, different views give you different kind of controls. So you'll see that I'm actually in the back view, and you see how it's green and red. That's color coded to tell me that I can move along the X and the Y value. Now if I look at the from the top down view, it's now blue and red. That's color coded so that I can move along the Z and the X value, and that's the blue and the red. And if I look at this by pressing the number 3 on the 10 keypad from the right view, then I'm moving the Y and the Z value. And it gives you controls, so it's kind of cool, but again, it's a little frustrating because if you were to go into perspective view, okay, where you've got all three, that's really the only way that you're going to see all three axes. So even though that I was in the top view and it looked like I only see 2, there's a really teeny green one in there. You just can't move it up and down in this view. You have to be in perspective view. So that's a little frustrating. The other frustrating thing is this. If you want more handles, you need more keyframes. So if I ever want to, like, I'm going to go back to the top-down view, but if I want an extra handle somewhere in the middle here, what I need to do is place my cursor somewhere around frame 54 and 55, create a keyframe. Boop. When I create that keyframe, here's the problem. The path tool's turned on. I can't create a keyframe when the path tool's turned on. It's a little annoying. So I turn the path tool off. I'm trying to click it to turn it off. It doesn't like that. It likes the space bar to turn itself off. Oh. So I give a keyframe. When I hit the create keyframe, you got to make sure that, I'm not sure if you've played around with this, but you can control what pieces you give keyframes to. Like I don't want to give a keyframe to position and scale, just rotation. However, in order for the path tool to work, you need to make sure you have a keyframe that covers all of the pieces. I'm going to click OK. And, well, my path changed a little bit. That's okay, because I added a little extra control there. I'm going to come here and I'm going to make another keyframe here. All right. Now, I am going to put my spaceship somewhere in the middle. You see that I now have 5 keyframes. I turn on the path tool. Boom! I got 5 sets of controls. And adjusting the controls, just click and pulling, and that way you can have almost everything that you are used to if you're used to vector controls. And no matter what edits you make to that path, don't forget to test it. Go to the camera view and hit play and think, oh, that's going to look awesome once it's behind the Union Station. Then it's coming down and it's got a little weird curve, and then it's getting really, and like, whoa, right in my camera. I know. It's like, oh, that's not good. It's like, hello, missile, except it's a spaceship. And so be cautious about that. That's where, going back to your path tool and maybe tweaking it a little bit. Oops. Don't like that at all. Thinking, maybe I can even just get rid of a keyframe. Could you just get rid of a keyframe? The answer is heck yeah. If I were to click on to the path tool, turn that off, go back to the keyframe at this frame 207, and think, I don't want a handle there. Just delete it. Make sure the path tool is turned off. Just delete that keyframe. Boo! And then make sure you watch and see if you still like it. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's okay. All right, so the next thing is, how do we get that alignment to the path? Because right now it's kind of just, it's not really aligning. Now, old school would be to do this. Top-down view, which is the number 2 on the 10 keypad. Old school would be to set an initial position somewhere on each individual keyframe. You go to the keyframe and you're thinking, okay, so what do you mean initial position? Well, I'm going to zoom into the keyframe and probably should just target the, yeah, there we go. And zoom in here and rotate it. Press Y, rotate it, hand align it to the path. And then you go to your next keyframe. Remember, I'm on the targeting tool, so when I hit the next keyframe, I align it to the path. And then I go to the next keyframe and align it to the path. And I kind of decide, do I want the nose cone to follow or the engine to follow? And I'm thinking, okay, just the nose cone. And then I kind of align it to the path. And then I look at it and see if I like it or not. All right? Because sometimes the alignment issues, not so much. Like, see how it's kind of pointing up there? Kind of looks like it's kind of, actually, that's maybe not so bad. But it's looking like it's not really following along the path. Is there some automated options for aligning something to a path? The answer is yes, there is. Okay, in Lightwave, I'm going to go back to the top-down view. I'm going to turn off the targeting and zoom out a little bit so you can see more of the path. So there is a motion option that if you press the M key and go into the motion options. We've been here before for targeting. We haven't played with IK modifiers, but the one that we're going to play with is controller limits and this thing called rotation. Not position, not scale, but rotation. Rotation gives you the ability to have a heading and a pitch and a bank that is aligned to a path. There's a pull-down menu right there that says aligned to the path. There's a little problem, though, when I do this. Watch. Boom. It's now aligned to the path, but it's now sideways aligned to the path. What's it going to look like when we play the animation? And, well, it's going to be, yeah, it's aligned to the path. It's really nicely aligned to the path, and except that it's turned sideways. What's going on there? How do we fix that? So the fix is actually pretty easy, but again, I want to stress that if you're not wanting to use the motion path tools and not the alignment tools, you can maybe sometimes eyeball it and get a halfway decent animation. But if you want to use the alignment options, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have no keyframes on any of the rotations and we let the path do all of the work. How do you do that? Well, we go to each keyframe and we go to the rotation for each keyframe, and I'm just going to bounce back and forth to each of the keyframes, and I'm going to 0 all of the rotation. So I'm going to press the rotation option underneath the modify and rotate, and on each of these values for rotation in the lower left corner, I'm going to give them a 0. That means I'm taking out all of the keyframe options. I got auto key turned on, so it's just going to do it each time. I'm taking out all of the rotation keyframes that I gave this. So I'm, in a sense, setting this back to vanilla on the rotation. And this is a case where, should I have told you this earlier? Yeah, but if I told you earlier, you wouldn't have seen the results of why you needed to do that. Now, if you take and play your animation right now, you'll see that it'll just, well, looks, hey, cool, looks like a landing spaceship. You will see some motion going on in the rotation underneath the H, if you'll notice that's there. That's there because we did turn on the align to path, and so that's the automated keyframe values that it's giving it. Kind of cool, huh? How do I make my spaceship so it's pointed on the path? That is where what we're going to do is we're going to go back into Modeler, and we're just going to change the direction of the spaceship's orientation inside Modeler. Going into Modeler, boop, right there, and I change the orientation. Go into the Rotate tool. I just want to rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm going to do that numerically. And I'm going to do this along the X value, YX, because when you are building a model, you really want it to be front to back. If I save this, you'll see that in layout, then things eventually, when it catches up, will straighten itself out. There we go. Now it's not perfect. It looks like it's still pointed up in the air. How come? Because in my motion options for the ship, I did not put in the motion options for the pitch and the bank yet. I only put in the motion options for the heading. I press the M button in case you didn't know. I go to the pitch controller and I use that pull down menu and I change that one to align to path. Pull this down, align to path. Oh, that looks good. And bank control, align to path. Now you don't have to do all three. Like if you wanted to have something spinning around, maybe you just have the heading and the pitch aligned to the path, but the bank you can still keyframe. It's completely up to you. But this whole aligning to the path thing is going to give me a nice solid path with really not a whole lot of keyframes. Although I got a weird little turn that's happening at the one spot, but pretty dang happy with it. It's like following a nice little zip line. The turn that I don't like is right here. It looks like it happens really, really fast. Kind of like when you're on that one roller coaster and you got that jarring left turn. Let's look at the top-down view to see what's going on. And in my top-down view, I'm going to go over to that corner where that's happening, and there's my problem. That's a really sharp corner. As it's going around, it's like, poop, that's happening way too fast. So how can I adjust that? Well, if you're used to Illustrator, you know that you could go to an individual point. You could adjust the, well, curve as it comes in. In Lightwave, not so easy. I can, however, go to the keyframe and I could adjust the incoming curve by going into the graph editor, like the envelope, and adjusting the tension and bias continuity. Well, click on the graph editor. I put my cursor on the frame I want to adjust, which is frame 120. In the graph editor, you'll see that it shows up position and rotation on all of these things right there. And what I really care about, this is position. And I want to minimize that curve, or I want to adjust it or make it so it's not minimize the sharpness of it. So I click on the frame by using the selection tool that we talked about in the previous, and then I adjust the tension. And when I adjust the tension, you can see that I am allowing the curve so that it can pull itself out a little bit farther, and in a sense making it not quite such a sharp turn. Still a little, I think it's still okay. And I actually probably didn't need to have my playback head on the keyframe. Probably could have just selected it, but I wanted you to see which one it was. Could you play with the bias if you wanted to widen that out even a little bit more and maybe turn down the tension? It's really completely up to you. Getting that nice smooth motion and that nice smooth path is just going to make your whole animation look a lot more realistic, because you don't want a bad grade. And I'm not saying that that turn still looks, I don't really know if I like that turn better. Could I adjust it by going to the very last keyframe and pulling that down? The answer is sure, I could. And by the way, I don't have to go to the motion path. I could adjust this by pressing the T tool and lowering the Y value. There we go. And I still got a little bit of a bend right there, but at this point in the lecture, because I'm already talking, I'm in the 40-minute range, I need to get into the After Effects points, and also got to do the rendering. So, and I'll want to make sure this lecture's under an hour. So that's going to be, I think, an okay animation for me. Pretty dang happy with it. So before you render it out, you got one more thing to do, and that's to adjust the lighting. My lighting source is kind of coming in from about the direction of the camera is at. So I probably could adjust actually I didn't want to adjust the keyframe position on that one. I'm going to move this back to, I'm okay with leaving that where it is at 85. I'll just recopy it to 0. But I kind of want to adjust the distance light, and I'm only going to use a distance light because I want this to be like the sun. Kind of want the distance light to be kind of coming in from the same direction as your background. So it looks like it's kind of, yeah, coming from about the direction of the camera. I got a little bit of shadows right there away from the camera, so that's actually pretty good. I am going to make sure that I copy that keyframe for the light at 0. I also want to see what this looks like in VPR, because here's the bad thing about this. You're going to overblow your textures. Why? Well, I got GI, options. I'm going to turn those off. All right, and there you go. And I haven't done any texturing, and that's something that, again, I don't want this lecture to go past an hour, so you're going to want to actually add in your own textures. But the lighting is pretty important, making sure that you have it in the same general kind of area. And I'm not too bad about that. I think the only thing that I might do with this, I got it on default, it's probably turn on smoothing. I'm going to be pretty dang happy, especially with the reflection. Again, I hate those fins. All right. So the rendering part, you'll notice that backdrop window is sitting there. Why? I'm going to turn off my background, set that to none. And I want to make sure that I'm going to set my backdrop to black. No, empty. Actually, I'm going to render this without a backdrop. So it doesn't matter if that's turned on or turned off. The answer is, no, I want it off. How do I render it without a backdrop? Well, in your render options, when you get ready to do the rendering thing and you go to the render properties, we're going to change something. In my output, we're going to come in here, we're going to change our format so that it's not ping 24, it's ping 32. Why 32? Because if we change to a ping 32, what it will do is it'll have an alpha channel added into it. Now I realize there's another alpha channel up above there, but that's not what we want. We want to use a ping 32 pre-multiplied with an alpha channel. Alpha is a transparency. That means no background. Oh, okay. And if you render it as a ping 32, that gives us a 24-bit image with 8-bit alpha. And I'm going to set it to render to whatever folder I got, and then I'm going to show you how it looks in After Effects. You're not going to sit through the rendering. Duh, that's a no-brainer. All right, so I'm going to pause this lecture, and I'm going to come back after the rendering's done. So what you see in front of you here is After Effects, Adobe After Effects. Here's a little startup window that shows, and this is some work I've done. I'm going to go ahead and close that little startup window. After Effects is a 2D animation program that we're going to be using strictly for compositing. And it does a whole lot more than we're going to do, but we'll do a little bit of post-processing also. Post is something that happens after the editing. And to do this, well, it's just kind of steps. So the first step is open up the program. We're using After Effects CC 2018, but it doesn't really matter what version that you're going to use. You're welcome to use any version of After Effects because this is all going to be the same process. In my program, I'm going to go File, and I'm going to do the Import, and I'm going to choose File. And I'm going to navigate, here's all my renders, made a little render folder. I'm going to navigate into my spot where I had my train stored at, trains.psd, and I'm going to import this as a composition. Now, there's two options, one for layer sizes and one for composition. Just go ahead and choose the one that just says composition. As long as you remember to crop it correctly at 1920 by 1080, you're going to be a happy camper. If you don't have it cropped correctly, you're going to be a very unhappy camper because this part will not work right when you export it. So this is where I'm going to go ahead and import this in as a composition, import, and it's going to give me an option that says, hey, do I want to do any layer styles? The answer is, I'm not doing any layer styles, so it doesn't matter. There's nothing there to be editable. But this is where you can double check yourself. In the upper left hand corner, at least in my project window, it's going to say 1920 by 1080. Woo! It's got a 1.0, that's an aspect ratio, for pixels, not the aspect ratio of the actual image. The square pixels is something that's used for what we want. We're going to go ahead and move on because, hey, that is indeed 1920 by 1080. What shows up is something that says composition and another thing that says folders. If you ever wanted to, you don't have to, but inside the folders are the individual layers. If you're a Photoshop person and you've labeled your layers, you're going to see them correctly labeled, and you can even click on them individually and the little thumbnail will change. All we really want to do though is we want to go to the composition and double click on the icon and open up our composition so we can get it, well, started. The bad part about CC 2018 is that default length for some compositions are, in my case, it's 2 seconds, and we don't want that. We're doing a 10-second animation. I had 300 frames, so you're probably going to need to go to your composition and then composition settings and change that duration to a certain time. Now yours may be 30, depending upon whoever was using the computer ahead of time, but it's probably not going to be 10. At least I don't think it should be 10, but you need to change that duration to 10. If you're wondering what all those zeros are, the first one is hours, the second one is minutes, the third one is seconds, and the fourth one is frames. And this little duration thing is called time code. Okay? Clicking OK is all you're going to do. Now, once you change the value, you may need to adjust the view, and if you had to extend your pictures, you also may need to grab and extend the pictures out. This is very much just like something you would have done to do some trimming in Adobe Premiere, and that may or may not happen. All right, but there's a good chance that if it comes in at a default length of 30 and you go shorter, that you're going to be totally fine. So what you're going to see is your Photoshop, but what you don't know is that you actually have, I'm going to turn off the eyeball on the background, is you actually have the cutout version on one layer, that's the foreground, and on the background I have the full version. So we are going to import in our rendered sequence of frames. Right click, import, file. The rendered sequence of frames, in my case, is called new renders. How come there's two called renders? Well, there's an old renders. Those are from like 2015. And the new renders, yay! That's what we did. That's what I just did. So I'm going to click on the very first frame, and just like Premiere Pro, you're going to need to make sure its sequence is turned on. Make sure you just click it. It may automatically detect it. You don't know. But this is going to be imported as footage this time, not composition. And why would I say footage? I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm going to click import. When you bring that in, it will come in as a single, it'll say 0 to 300, should say 0 to 300. It should also say 1920 by 1080, and it should be black. If it is not coming in as pitch black, or maybe like just a small individual frame of whatever your spaceship is, if it's coming in with a background, that means you did not render it as alpha channel, which means you got to go back and re-render it as a 32-bit ping. All right. Dragging this into your layers is what's going to happen, but we want to drag this to be specifically between the background and the foreground. So how do you drag? Well, you click on the icon, hold it with your left mouse button, hold the left mouse button, continuing to hold on the left mouse button until you can put the cursor right between the background and foreground. Then you let up on the left mouse button. Boom. It's not going to make that noise. At this point, you've just created a composition. In fact, you can watch it. If you don't have the preview button open, like if it's hidden or something like that, you can expand it and hit the play button. You can also hit your space bar, okay, and that will play your animation. Now, depending upon your positioning, and you may find that it's not going to be perfect. Like right there, it's really not perfect. Look, in fact, at some point, it's like I expected it. Let's see, wait, I get to this point, and I'm going like bottom, 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 like a shark. It's not Shark Week though. So how do I get it? It's going behind my foreground, but at some point I don't want it to be behind my foreground anymore. Well, that little adjustment that we did on that foreground layer, where I grabbed the one part and pulled it out, well, that little adjustment, which is right there, yield, I pulled it to make it more visible. That's going to be making it visible, and then I'm going to pull this back to a certain spot, and then after that, make the foreground invisible. Is that a term, invisible? No, I don't think so. Anyway, so the foreground is there, obscuring my spaceship, and then at a certain point, the foreground is going to go away, and my spaceship just sits on top of the background, and that gives the illusion of flying behind something because I trimmed this piece down. Now, I don't want to trim it too short, because otherwise what will happen is it'll get to a point where it's like if you trim it way too short, it's like, wait a sec, my spaceship's not covering it up. Okay, and you got to make sure that, yeah, that's a mistake right there. In fact, that would be bad. What would that do to your grade? Bad. Make sure that it's clearing whatever you're flying behind, and that would be then when you would, in effect, just trim that layer gone, and then let the item fly in front of the entire layer. And that's basics composition 101. Simply stacking different elements. All right. Now, the playing, again, it may not play smoothly, depending upon what drives you're coming off of. Mine's playing smoothly because it's coming off my home SSD drive, and so those 300 frames are playing back, boom, 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 boom. By the way, the render time for this was pretty dramatically quicker in Lightwave 2018 than it was in previous. Now, at this point, we need to do some post-processing because this is all fine and dandy, and this will be good if you wanted to get a C on your assignment. But this process still is not complete. What we're going to do is we're going to put what's called an overlay. What's an overlay? So there are a whole bunch of video clips. I'll go ahead and show you one right now. So what you're looking at here is film. This is specifically 8mm damaged film, and this is a film clip that is just kind of empty. In fact, it kind of looks like it's looping, and it doesn't really show anything, which is perfect for doing an overlay. And where I got a couple of these from Pixabay, a couple came from free stock footage somewhere, and one even came from YouTube, where the guy says, hey, here, download this. All right, so let's show you how to implement this. Now, all of the damaged footage will be linked from the assignment, so you can download them all and take a peek at them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import, and I'm just going to go ahead and choose, not the one that you saw, let me choose 8mm film overlay number 2, or maybe film scratchy overlay. Some of these are really damaged, some of them are not. So try one out. If you don't like it, try the next. Go ahead and import in at least one of them. And what you're going to do is drag that over the top of foreground. What do you mean top? I'm just going to put it on top of foreground. And it's going to be its own little layer in itself. Now, sometimes they're going to be like really, really noticeable, and sometimes they're not. Like if I'm going to go ahead and import in another one, and that is going to be 8mm film overlay 2, and I'm going to drag that also on top, and you'll see that where film scratchy was, I'm going to turn the eyeball off. Film scratchy just kind of had a few scratches. I don't know if you got to look some dots, but the 8mm one is pretty noticeable degraded. Yeah, it's just just one of those things. So choose the one that you want. I'm going to go with both of them actually. What I'm also going to point out is that they don't last the entire length. What? Yeah. So they go by kind of fast. So since this is film, I could slow this down. How? Well, right click on either one of these two, and what you're going to do is you're going to go up to time, and you're going to choose time stretch. And what this does is this puts it in slow motion. And all you got to do is set your duration to be 10. And that's absolutely fine to cut these in half. And I'm going to do for both of them because I'm eventually going to show you both. And in the space of just a few short seconds, I would tell you it's okay to have something playing at half speed when you're trying to emulate some film. What you don't want to do is you don't want to take and slow something down too much. Now, if you don't like the whole speed thing, like let's say I'm going to go to the 8mm film, and you're thinking, I don't like it really, really slow. Could I just put it there twice? The answer is sure. Yeah, if you didn't want to stretch this out, I probably could have just done an undo. You could have just drug it down in there twice. Okay, all you got to do is just drag it into your timeline and have when one ends, the next one begins. Okay, and that just is something that goes. So how do you make this actually show? Well, you need a blending mode. All right, where are blending modes in After Effects? Blending modes in After Effects are hidden. It's not super secret. Here's how you get to it. So where that word parent is, you're going to right click and you're going to choose columns. And it doesn't have to be accidentally right at parent. You can actually go to layer names and right click and choose columns. But the column that you want is the one that's called modes. It's not turned on by default. And what we want to do is we want to take the modes where it says normal and we want to change that. You're probably going to do multiply. Multiply is going to be the color times the color, and that gives you color. And what we really like about the multiply is that black times anything is black. And so in the 8mm one, where I had the black times the background, gives me black. And boom, there we go. And it gives me the nice scratches. And if you do the double instead of the time stretch, don't forget you got to set both of them. And well, that was different. So get a little too happy with that. And that gives you a nice little overlay. And that will be perfect. Now, if you want to see what the other one looks like, the other one is the film scratches. And the film scratches is a little different because if I go to multiply on that one, it's black times black. It's already black. Whoa, what? Try screen. Okay. And if I hit screen, then I can see that I still get a whole bunch of white speckles. Not as much damage, not quite as cool. So maybe I could make it look better by doing like a sepia tone color overlay. All right, so I'm going to go inside my layers, right click, and get my menu. Well, I can come in here, go to a new, and I could go to a solid, and I could choose a color. All right, and if I were to choose a color, I would probably choose like a little yellow sepia tone-ish kind of thing, maybe a little brown, something that would be like degraded film. And I could put that, and I would change its blending mode and do like a hue or some sort of color hint. And I'm thinking maybe soft light would be pretty good for me on that one. And that way, and I'm going to put this underneath the film scratches so that I try and make sure that the film scratches do definitely show up there. And they just kind of show up as white dots. I don't really know if I like them too much. Personally, if I were to turn this one in, I would go ahead and I'd stick with the film overlay. I could turn on the little yellow and be kind of happy with that. And if you're really, really wanting to adjust the colors, any sort of solid color that you put in there, just play with the opacity. You could turn the opacity down to get like a semi kind of tint, sepia tone. How do you export this and get it into Premiere so you can slap on some audio? Well, to be honest with you, you could actually, if you wanted to edit the audio ahead of time, if you had an exact 10-second length audio, you could import the audio into After Effects and you could export it from there. But for us, what we're going to do is we're going to do File and we're going to save this. Hit Save, and it's going to ask me, do I want to overwrite something? The answer is yeah, because I already practiced it ahead of time. So there's two ways you can progress from here to put your music on if you want to use Premiere Pro. You can take and load this project into Premiere Pro if you have Premiere Pro CC 2018, and then it will render it all out at the same time using something called the Adobe's Dynamic Link. If the Dynamic Link doesn't work, you can actually come into here and you can render this out just like by going Export and go to the Adobe Media Encoder, and this is the exact same thing that you've seen in the classroom before from Premiere, and you can export this out as a video file that then you put the video file into Premiere. And as always, remember to crank up the quality setting. Now in Premiere, I'm not going to show you the music with the exported video because you should know that, but here's how the dynamic link works. You click on New Project, just like normal, and I've already got mine set for, testing it out. Going to go ahead and click OK because I've already done it. Importing in the dynamic link After Effects file is File, Adobe Dynamic Link, Import After Effects Composition, and then you have to navigate to where the composition is. And if it seems like a weird little interface, it is. But eventually you'll find your composition, click on it to start the link process, and then when your composition shows up in the right-hand column, select that and click OK. And then what it should do is it should load the composition into Premiere. Double click on the composition to get it into view. You should be able to scrub and see it absolutely fine. Yeah, there you go. Okay, you can right click on the composition and you can tell it to make a new sequence from clip, and all you got to do then is slap the music on and export it out. Now, it could save you a little bit of render time, maybe. So that's going to end your lesson, other than the fact that I didn't put music on it, but you can rewind it and see the original version. And my spaceship looks a little green. Not liking that. Green aliens. Go figure.